Good morning, and welcome to First Church Unitarian in Littleton, Massachusetts, on this beautiful day in May. We're very happy that you have found us and that you're joining us today for church. And we particularly welcome any newcomers to our wonderful church community. My name is Bill Duston, and I serve as one of your deacons and on the Green Sanctuary Task Force. Please read our Community Matters newsletter, which is available on our website at fculittle.org. You will find information about our religious education program and other church activities and events. Today, we are having our annual church meeting right after the service to discuss and vote on important issues for all of us. Please make every effort to attend, and I look forward to seeing you there. Our service today is entitled, We Kindred Pilgrim Souls? Thank you and welcome to church. And now, Laurie Grant will read the warrant.
Hello and good morning. I'm Laurie Grant, the clerk. First, the voting list is now available on our website. I am notifying you, the members of First Church Unitarian, that you are lawfully entitled to vote in its affairs to meet on a Zoom call. The link will be provided after church services on May 16th, 2021 at 11:30 a.m. or immediately following the Sunday service, whichever is later, to act on the following articles. First, to review and accept the minutes from the October 2020 warranted meeting. Second, to hear and act upon the annual report. Third, to elect officers of the church, nominating committee members, and delegates to the UUA General Assembly, June 2021. Fourth, to act upon the budget from July 2021 through June 2022. Fifth, to act on allocating $23,000 for an engineering system design for the Green Sanctuary Heating System project. Sixth, to approve a change to our bylaws, Article 5, Section A, from a Board of Deacons of 4 members to a Board of Deacons of 3 members. Seventh, to act on proposed membership bylaw change. Eighth, to approve the renewal of the Green Sanctuary Task Force. Ninth, to approve the renewal of the Neighborhood Supper Task Force. 10th, to authorize the treasurer to borrow money on behalf of the church. And 11th, to conduct any other business which may lawfully come before said meeting. Thank you all very much and have a beautiful day. I hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Good morning. My name is Molly Lozeau, and I'm your music director. I just wanted to make a note that the gathering video music today is actually by Nancy Faber and performed by a student of Carolyn McCreary. His name is Elliot Murray, and he's 11 years old. And she thought it would be a great opportunity for him to have a goal of recording a piece and having it be listened to. And I think he did a wonderful job. It was very beautiful. And now for our prelude. This is a hymn written circa 1785 by David Reed, an American composer. And the title of the hymn tune is called Windham. So here you go. Here's a little glimpse into a hymn tune from about the time when we're talking about.
We gather together as a congregation this morning, as others have been doing in this parish for more than 300 years. Even as we are gathered virtually and in other ways our forebears could scarcely have foreseen. Today we consider, as we have all month, the significance and meaning of story and of history and her story and their story and our story. May we build on the good we find there, and may we learn from the rest. It is good to be together, even virtually. Let us worship. A very important part of our worship each week is our chalice lighting, along with the words of our covenant being spoken. Usually we say them together here. Having a covenant as a congregation is something that dates back to Pilgrim and Puritan times, as we will be talking about today. So it is an old tradition. So we will be led this morning in lighting our chalice and hearing our covenant by Madelyn Hammer.
Love is the spirit of this church, and serve as its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Thank you, Madelyn and Dapple. Appreciate that. Good morning and welcome to First Church Unitarian here in Littleton, Massachusetts. My name is Lara Hoke, and it is my pleasure and privilege to be the minister serving this incredible congregation. If you're new with us this morning, I join Bill in welcoming you, and I hope that you will check our website if you haven't already. It's fculittle.org. And as you look at the homepage, go down a little bit, you'll see a purple triangle, rectangle. I've forgotten my geometry. You'll see a purple rectangle, and you can click on that and fill out what we call a virtual pew card if you wish for one of us to contact you. So consider doing that. This morning, we will have an auction sermon. Each year, this congregation has a fundraising auction, and it is traditional for the minister to offer up a sermon topic. And this morning's topic was selected by Joyce Williams, our church historian. And so you'll be getting some history, some interesting stuff, I think. Please note that our opening hymn, the one we are about to sing, was written by Isaac Watts. He was a 17th century nonconformist minister in England. He was the son of another nonconformist minister in England who was often in prison because their beliefs, what we would now call pilgrim or separatist beliefs, were very dangerous to hold. Watts wrote more than 600 hymns, which were reworkings of psalms. And these hymns were brought over to the colonies in America pretty early on. He is known as the father of English hymnody, and we will be singing one of his best known hymns now. It's number 281 in the Gray hymnal, O God, our help in ages past. This is our Time for All Ages, and this morning we have another two-part Time for All Ages that I hope you will enjoy. The first part is a story told by our own Karen Tucker-Barisano, who is on our wonderful standing committee and our rocking religious education committee. The story is told from the same story of the same event told from 4 different points of view, because every story has a point of view. But the Time for All Ages story will not, in fact, be that long in spite of 4 points of view, about 5 minutes. And then after that, you'll see an RE gathering video from the time we got together May 7th, and it was wonderful. So I hope you'll enjoy that video too.
Good morning. Welcome to Time for All Ages. Our story this morning is called Voices in the Park by Anthony Browne. First voice. It was time for Victoria, our pedigree Labrador, and Charles, our son, to go for a walk. When we arrived at the park, I let Victoria off her lead. Immediately, some scruffy mongrel appeared and started bothering her. I shooed off, but the horrible thing chased her all over the park. I ordered it to go away, but it took no notice. Sit, I said to Charles. Here, right here. I was just planning what we should have to eat that evening when I saw Charles had disappeared. Oh dear, where had he gone? You get some frightful types in the park these days. I called his name for what seemed like an age. Then I saw him talking to a very rough-looking child. Charles, come here. At once, I said. And come here too, Victoria. Second voice. I need to get out of the house, so me and Smudge took the dog to the park. He loves it there. I wish I had half the energy he's got. I settled on a bench and looked through the paper for a job. I know it's a waste of time, really, but you got to have a bit of hope, haven't you? Then it was time to go. Smudge cheered me up. She chatted happily to me all the way home. Third voice. I was at home on my own again. It's so boring. Then Mummy said that it was time for our walk. There was a very friendly dog in the park, and Victoria was having a great time. I wish I was. "Do you want to come on the slide?" a voice asked. It was a girl, unfortunately, but I went anyway. She was brilliant on the slide. She went really fast, and I was amazed. The 2 dogs raced around like they were old friends, and the girl took off her coat and swung on the climbing frame, so I did the same. I'm good at climbing trees, so I showed her how to do it. She told me her name was Smudge. A funny name, I know, but she's quite nice. Then Mummy caught us talking together, and I had to go home. Maybe Smudge will be there next time. Fourth voice. Dad had been really fed up, so I was pleased when he said we could take Albert to the park. Albert's always in such a rush and hurry to be let off his lead. He went straight up to this lovely dog and sniffed its bum. He always does that. Of course, the other dog didn't mind, but its owner was really angry. Silly twit. I got talking to this boy. I thought he was a bit of a wimp at first, but he's okay. We played on the seesaw, and he didn't say much, but later on, he was a bit more friendly. We both burst out laughing when we saw Albert having a swim. Then we all played on the bandstand, and I felt really, really happy. Charlie picked a flower and gave it to me. Then his mom called him and he had to go, but he looked sad. When I got home, I put the flower in some water and made Dad a nice cup of tea. That is the end. Thank you for joining us this morning.
That was so much fun. We had a great time that day. You could probably tell. Boy, that Mozart is some rowdy music, huh? Now is the time for our offering. First Church Unitarian in Littleton has congregational polity, which also dates back to our Puritan ancestors. This means that we're self-supporting, that we rely on ourselves to provide our own funding. So we rely on the generosity of our members and friends. If you are able, and if you wish, you could send an offering or perhaps a pledge payment to this address in Littleton, or you could do it online at the website. Look for the yellow donate button in the upper right corner of the homepage, and it will walk you through donating online if you wish to do that. This morning's offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation.
I'd like to say that our offertory music today is by Arlo Guthrie. It's called Oh in the Morning. And this was actually a request by Chet Olson, who won one of the auction items last year for picking out music for a service. And I have to say that I didn't know this song before, and now it is a beautiful song. And now I will, added it to my playlist and things like that. So this is a piano arrangement. And thank you, Chet.
Today's auction sermon turns out to be far more timely than I originally realized. First of all, yes, our Soul Matters theme for the month is story. And of course, there are stories to be told about what happened in our long ago history. But also, yesterday was the 60th anniversary of the merger of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church in America. The Unitarian Universalist Association, to which we belong, was created on May 15th, 1961. So happy 60th to the UUA. It's our diamond anniversary, and they said it wouldn't last. But here we are. Today we consider a longer ago coming together of two other similar yet not similar groups in our history. Namely, we're considering the Pilgrims of Plymouth Colony in southeastern Massachusetts and the Puritans of Boston and the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I know that it's sometimes a shock to newcomers that the ultra-modern religious tradition of Unitarian Universalism, known for being very, very progressive and permissive and so on, it's a shock to find that this tradition has Puritan roots. It's strange, but it's true. We have Puritan roots on our Unitarian side. I preached about this back in November of 2018. And when this video is fully published later on YouTube, I will be pointing to a link to that sermon right now. And below there will be a link as well to that old sermon if you want more detail. But I'm going to give a short recap now of how Unitarians evolved from Puritans. You might recall that the Puritans were the people who left England for America around 1630 because they took issue with certain aspects of the Church of England. Namely, they thought the Church of England was still too Roman Catholic in style. They thought it was too lavish and ornate. They didn't like that hierarchy of bishops that felt far away. And they wanted what we now call congregational polity, where each congregation is a sovereign body. As I mentioned, a polity that we still have to this day as Unitarian Universalists. The Puritans also wanted to base things more strictly on the Bible. So the Puritans sailed to the New World to establish what they believed would be a more truly Christian way of worship, based largely in Calvinism. It's true that in many ways the Puritans were old-fashioned even for their time and very strict and ultra-serious about church. But the very short explanation for how they evolved into Unitarians is this. The Puritans emphasized reading and education. All Puritans were expected to read the Bible, so literacy was emphasized, including for women, because they were teaching the Bible to the children. The literacy rate was incredibly high. And because the Puritans wanted learned ministers, they founded a local college just 6 years after they got here in 1636, named after a Puritan minister, John Harvard. And Harvard was really founded initially to educate learned ministers. Not only did they emphasize literacy, but the Puritans also believed in science. They thought that science was ultimately a way of studying God's creation. So they were pro-science, didn't see it as anti-religion, and they were pro-literacy and education. Again, I refer you to that 2018 sermon if you want more details about the transition and how it happened. But for my purposes today, I simply say between reading a lot, being educated, practicing critical thinking and embracing science, and becoming moral worldly as they moved from farming to commerce, combined with some ridiculously strict membership rules that ultimately backfired, by 1700, the Puritans were already pretty unrecognizable from the folks who landed in Massachusetts with Calvinist zeal in 1630. By the time this standing order town church that I'm in was established in 1714, we were already fairly modern in our thinking in relative terms. So then, who were the Pilgrims? The Pilgrims were really a subset of the Puritans. That is, all Pilgrims were Puritans, but not all Puritans were Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were also religious nonconformists in England, Calvinists, who basically had all the same issues with the Church of England that the other Puritans had. But the Pilgrims took it one step further. While the Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England, thus the name, the Pilgrims wanted really nothing to do with the Church of England and felt that it could never be right under the Church of England. So they wanted to separate from it completely. And originally, and often, they were called separatists before people started calling them Pilgrims. So the separatists or Pilgrims came to the shores of Massachusetts in 1620. And here we have another anniversary because 400 years ago, this past fall, is when they arrived. There would have been a big celebration except for the pandemic. So the Pilgrims actually got here a decade before the non-separatist Puritans. The Pilgrims had intended to take the Mayflower to a colony in Northern Virginia. Of course, that went all the way up to what is now the state of New York. But a rough second month of the voyage meant that they wound up coming ashore on what is now Provincetown, Massachusetts. I bet you thought I was going to say Plymouth. But no, first they landed in Provincetown. Thus that big Pilgrim Monument that is the most distinctive landmark in P-Town. I'm sure many of you have climbed to the top of it. The Pilgrims did not find a suitable place in Provincetown. Go figure, they must not have tried Spiritus Pizza or the Lobster Pot. But in any case, the Pilgrims then sailed again. And this time, yes, they wound up in Plymouth. And I'm sure many of you have seen Plymouth Rock and gazed upon the unimpressive stone with the disappointment of generations. But I digress. Now, this is where I'm reminded a bit of our Time for All Ages this morning, as told from 4 different viewpoints. There were, of course, already people living where the Pilgrims landed. In fact, in Plymouth, they basically set up their home on the remains of what had been a Patuxet village. The Patuxet, which is a band of the Wampanoag Tribal Confederation, had been struck basically by plague, by disease brought by Europeans who were there doing fur trade earlier. So the Pilgrims set up home in this abandoned village during that first winter. The Pilgrims were originally meant to go, as I said, to that territory in Northern Virginia, which already had a formal royal charter for its governance. But the Mayflower coming ashore in Massachusetts was entering unchartered territory. So the Mayflower Compact was hurriedly written down and signed before ever coming ashore, just 200 words. But they're significant. As Bill Newcott writes in the National Geographic, the Mayflower Compact stands as a landmark document in North American history. Although Native American tribes had organized into governments for centuries, the Pilgrims Compact was the New World's first written constitution of self-government by Europeans. So it has significance for European history in any case. And so the Plymouth colony was founded. As you might recall from your school days, the Pilgrims had a really tough time of it that first winter. It was horrible, the winter of 1620, 1621. As rough as that voyage on the Mayflower had been across the Atlantic, only one of the passengers actually died en route. But of the 101 other pilgrims that were on the voyage and survived the trip, they encountered a lack of shelter. In fact, many of them stayed on the Mayflower as shelter was slowly constructed ashore. Scurvy took a toll on them, and the unsanitary conditions on the overcrowded ship led to other disease. And so that first winter, 45 of the Pilgrims, almost half of them, died. On the bright side, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag did manage quickly to work out a contract, a kind of agreement, and there was a peace of necessity between them, not really of true friendship, but of necessity, that lasted for about 50 years. And thanks to Tisquantum, or Squanto, as he's more commonly known, the Pilgrims learned how to survive on the land. The Reverend Dr. Clyde Grubbs preached about that in some length here a couple of years ago, and I will put a link here to that sermon as well if you want details on that history. So the following November, 1621, is of course the harvest feast that was celebrated by the surviving 50 or so Pilgrims and about 90 of the Wampanoag. And the feast is the basis for the mythological version of the Thanksgiving story that we have. So it wasn't much, Plymouth colony, but it was the second permanent English colony in the New World after Jamestown, Virginia. English did continue to arrive, and there was some procreation happening, as you might imagine. And so 10 years later, in 1630, Plymouth colony had about 300 people. About 10 years after that, in the early 1640s, there were approximately 2,000 English in the colony. And near the end of the 17th century, the entire population of Plymouth County was somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000. So now, with that background, we arrive to the heart of the questions asked for this auction sermon. Thinking back to the other Puritans, the non-separatists who came more to the Boston area of Massachusetts a decade after the Pilgrims, the ones who formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was a far more popular destination than the Plymouth colony ever was. And during the first 10 years of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, from 1630 to 1640, just in that 10 years, approximately 20,000 English arrived in that Boston area. And by the end of the 17th century, the Massachusetts Bay Colony population was about 50,000, an order of magnitude larger than Plymouth colony. The first formal connection between Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies was in 1686, the first formal connection, when a single government was formed known as the Dominion of New England. It also included colonies of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. But this Dominion of New England dissolved after just a few years, like 3 years. Its president was wildly unpopular, and a rebellion ensued, led by the Puritans of Boston, who even arrested the president of Dominion. When this news reached Plymouth, they went back simply to self-rule. Now, some New Englanders went over to England after this dissolution of the Dominion to ask for the return of their royal colonial charters, which had been nullified when the Dominion was formed. But this ended up being kind of a tricky situation for the Plymouth colony because they had never had an official royal charter to begin with. They just had that homespun Mayflower compact of 200 words written basically on a napkin or something. So the leaders of Plymouth colony were hoping to get their own royal charter at this point, but that didn't happen. Instead, England issued a new charter in 1691, which merged the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts Bay Colony and other territories as well, forming the province of Massachusetts Bay. And as you might surmise from the name, and as you might imagine, the far more numerous Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony really overwhelmed the Pilgrims of Plymouth. Not to mention, the separatist Pilgrims had really been societal outsiders as the bigger radicals by far than the other Puritans. By comparison to the other Puritans, the separatist Pilgrims tended to have less wealth and less education and less social standing. And so they were essentially subsumed by the non-separatist Puritans after 1691 and heading into the 18th century. So yes, to answer one of the auction sermon questions, there was in fact a merger of the Pilgrims and the other Puritans, but it was essentially foisted upon them by England, and the Pilgrims wound up with the short end of the stick as the smaller, less powerful entity. Having said that, apparently, the Pilgrims and the other Puritans got along pretty well, even before any of these formal connections. When the non-separatist Puritans established Massachusetts Bay Colony in and around Boston in the 1630s, apparently the Pilgrims welcomed them. The Pilgrims were very communal by nature and non-forgiving, and had in many ways a kind spirit, at least toward other English. And apparently the two colonies cooperated with each other in the 1600s before the merger, in spite of the Massachusetts Bay settlers being a more privileged and more worldly group than the Plymouth colony folk. By the 1700s, the congregational polity-style Puritan churches were the standing order town churches supported by taxes before there was really a separation of church and state. And there seems to have been little to no difference between the churches that had originally been Pilgrim versus other Puritan churches. Perhaps the Pilgrim churches on average had fewer members of wealth and prominence in the beginning, but that really shifted over time. And so there was in the 1700s effectively one congregational style Puritan church here in New England. Though each congregation was still sovereign, they all had informal and helpful connections to each other, not unlike our Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations today. In closing, I can't help but notice the correlations between the 1691 merger of Pilgrims and Puritans, the non-separatist Puritans, and the 1961 merger of Universalists and Unitarians. 1691, 1961, what could it mean? The Universalists played the role of the Pilgrims as the generally speaking, less privileged, less wealthy, less formally educated group. The Unitarians, by contrast, played the part of the non-separatist Puritans, continuing to run Harvard and being the best formally educated religious group in the United States. By 1961, the numbers of both the Universalists and the Unitarians had shrunk, but the Universalist numbers had shrunk far more dramatically. At one point, the Universalists were a surprisingly large denomination with millions of members. The Unitarians were never that big. But by 1961, the Universalists and Unitarians were a similarly small size. Still, the higher social standing of the Unitarians meant that the Universalists were somewhat subsumed after the 1961 merger. The Unitarian culture dominated most UUA congregations. However, there is a happy ending of sorts, a kind of last laugh for both the Universalists and the Pilgrims. In some sense, each one of them triumphed quietly. For the Universalists, the triumph was this: the reason their numbers declined was that their most distinctive doctrine was universal salvation, the idea that no loving God would condemn humans to suffer eternally in hell. And over time, the mainline Christian churches not the evangelical ones, but the mainline Christian churches, tended to stop emphasizing hell and hellfire. So in some ways, universalism shrunk because they had quietly won the war on hellfire. Somewhat similarly, the Pilgrims quietly won the separatist war. That is, with the American Revolution, the connection to the Church of England was over, severed completely, along with everything else of the official connections to England. So the separatist Pilgrims won, even as they were subsumed. Culturally, modern Unitarian Universalism might have descended more obviously from the Puritans rather than the separatist Pilgrims. But ideologically, I'd say the separatists won. The separatists, the Pilgrims, they won. I don't want to go back to the Church of England. Do you? And I wonder, in the past decade or two, it feels like the big-hearted culture of the Universalists, and perhaps the Pilgrims before them, is making some ground versus the more egg-headed culture of the Unitarians. We side with love these days, perhaps oversiding with cold reason. That is the current trend. So may we continue to learn from and grow from the best of our traditions and learn from the worst of our traditions too. And may we never forget that indeed, blessed are the meek, for the meek shall inherit the earth. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. I think I forgot to introduce our closing hymn. Sorry, I forgot to introduce that closing hymn. That closing hymn was actually written in 1933, specifically to celebrate the growing amount of collaboration between the Unitarians and Universalists. And when the vote was cast to merge, the gathered assembly rose up and sang that hymn together, which would have been rousing information for you to have before we sang it. So my apologies. All right, so please hear now our closing words. They, as is our tradition now, I encourage you, if you are with someone and you can safely hold hands, to do that. And otherwise, if you are alone in the room, as I am alone here in the sanctuary, I encourage you to put your hands together and feel that warmth. And imagine your loving circle of friends and neighbors, people from this congregation, people from beyond it, maybe even Imagine it going back historically, if you like, to Puritans, Pilgrims, and even the Native American tribes, which we owe so much apology to. And so think of them all as we now have a widened circle of compassion. Friends, there is so much to learn from history. There's so much to learn from things that went before, triumphs that occurred, mistakes that were made, inspiring, loving moments of connection and helping one another and reaching out beyond your own people, and crushing moments of devastation and wrongdoing. We learn from it all. We continue to try to learn and to do right and to repair what we can from mistakes made in the past. May we indeed grow and learn from our heritage, even as we respect and learn from heritages outside of our own. May we indeed be one people. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
And we have another exciting piece of music to play for you. For the postlude, you'll hear Siyahamba, written by Andries Van Tondor, and you will hear Peter Ersland 3 times. He created this piece by listening to himself and singing with himself, and you'll hear Mike Pilman and I on some drums and percussion. So here is Siyahamba.
Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos, 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 Siyahamba, Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos, Siyahamba. Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos. We are marching in the light of God. 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 We are marching. We are marching. We are marching in the light of God. We are marching. We are marching. We are marching in the light of God. Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos. 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 Siyahamba, Siyahamba, Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos. Siyahamba, Siyahamba kuken yen kwen kos.
Thank you, Peter, Mike, and Molly. Thank you. That was